So hello, everybody. I love this. I ring the bell and I heard the decibel level goes up. Yeah. So tonight I'm going to continue with a talk I actually gave last time, which was quite a while ago. And I call this talk More Than It Seems. And tonight we're going to focus on the Buddha's third noble truth. For those of you who don't know what the Buddha's noble truths were, or kind of forgot, I will just briefly say they are the centerpiece, a centerpiece in the Buddha's teaching. First noble truth is that there's suffering in life, and I don't think that's news to anybody. The second noble truth is that the cause of suffering is the fact that we hang on. We grasp onto something. And, that's more problematic. That's not always understood. We don't always catch on to that little fact. But once you catch on to it, then the third noble truth becomes obvious, and that is if you are holding on to something that is causing suffering, then the way to alleviate that is to let go. We're tonight going to be talking about the third noble truth, and I will say that in the Buddha's time, these were really radical. By the way, the fourth noble truth, it's called the Eightfold Path, and there are 8 factors or 8 tasks to do to enable us to alleviate suffering and to let go. We won't be talking about the fourth, but only about the third tonight. And as I said, these noble truths were really radical in the time of the Buddha. And the reason why is because he put the issue squarely on individuals. He said, you can alleviate the suffering in your own life. And why was this extraordinary? Because he lived in the time in India in the probably 400s BC, we don't know exactly when this was still a time when it was in the grip of the ancient Vedic teachings, which basically said, hey, the gods are in charge of everything, and it's the Brahmin priests who mediate and have kind of a direct connection with the gods. You pay them, give them enough whatever, money or whatever, and they will conduct ceremonies for you, ancient ceremonies, and that's going to bring you all kinds of good stuff. The Buddha said, wait a minute, that's not the way it works. He said, you, and you alone, it's you who are responsible. Now, as I said, this was utterly radical, and it was stunning in his day. And to us, maybe it's a little bit less radical, at least at first glance. But I think when we start looking at what these 4 noble truths really are, and particularly when we start practicing with them, we recognize these really are radical. Because these 4 noble truths, the first 3, really invite us, they lead us on to go deeper and deeper, and to see more accurately really what our suffering is. I don't mean just the kind of, which I don't want to mean to diminish it, but the kind of affliction and circumstances that all of us experience sometimes that are really painful. We've all got that sometimes in life, and some of us have more of it than others. But beyond that, as we practice, we see more and more deeply into, hey, what is all of this about? And when we start seeing deeply into it, it is stunning. It's like, wow. You really see what's going on with you. And then you begin to look at how it is that you can really begin to let go. What does that mean? And so this is kind of where I want to begin to hone in tonight. And alleviating suffering, number 3, third noble truth, and how it's relevant to our lives. And I'm going to start with caterpillars and butterflies. I don't know, some of you may have seen on the John Warner Highway, there is a fairly new sculpture of a butterfly. It's really big. It's made of some kind of stone, like slate or something. It's really very attractive. And it's got to be like, and I'm not good at measurement, but maybe 4 feet tall and maybe 7 or 8 feet across, and it's sitting up on a big pole. And it's really beautifully done, and it must weigh a ton. And I thought, if it ever fell off of that pole that it's sitting on, it would obliterate all life form underneath. So I think this kind of statue is really, it's lovely It catches the form of a butterfly, or it may be a moth, but it catches the form beautifully, but it misses entirely the Tao of a butterfly. The Tao means the essence. I think when we think of butterflies, we don't think of something that is so heavy as this really is. It's not so heavy. We think of a butterfly and we think of it as being really light. Maybe you associate a butterfly with freedom, the flying, or the beauty, or the grace. It's the kind of qualities that many of us would admire. I mean, heck, when you start thinking about it, you recognize how often you see a butterfly motif in art. It's all over the place, right? Little art pieces of artwork. Are there caterpillars all over the place? No. You don't see these in artwork, do you? You know, I don't think most people would be heartened by the qualities of a caterpillar. In fact, if anything, we might think of ourselves more like a caterpillar than we would like a butterfly, you know, mundane, kind of creeping around, crawling, not sure where we're going, it looks like, but not like a butterfly. So I'd like to kind of just investigate that for a moment, and imagine, because let's say that we all know caterpillars become butterflies, right? So imagining, and I'm going to take us on a little journey, and I will say, I didn't make this up. I first heard it with a teacher named Adyashanti. Some of you know him. He told this, and he does it in a very funny way. I'm not going to even try to do it. But the process is really worth looking at. So imagining that you are a caterpillar, and you are in the garden of your host, and you're eating away at the leaves of their favorite flowers, and you're getting nice, and you're getting fat, and you're getting ready, you know, for the transformation. So at some point, what happens is that the chrysalis begins to form around you, and there you are in it, and you are on your way to transforming and becoming a butterfly. Yet at some point while you're in the chrysalis, it's really possible, if you were this little caterpillar, you begin to recognize, wait a minute, you know, what's going to be the end result here? And the end result is going to be, yeah, a butterfly, but I'm not going to come out of this, and a butterfly will. And at that point, you might well decide, you know, I don't think I want to be a butterfly after all, you know. Maybe being something like a flying caterpillar would be okay, but not a butterfly. But unfortunately, it's too late. You're already in process, and the change is beginning to happen right there in the chrysalis. And what happens is there's some kind of, there may be some biologists in here who know more than me, but I understand this, that the DNA, it liquefies. Oh, good, I see somebody say yes. Good, I'm glad this is right. Liquefies. And lo and behold, in due time, what emerges from this chrysalis is a butterfly, an entirely different creature. Same DNA, but a whole different creature. Now, why do I mention it? Well, I mention it because I think it's a metaphor for the Buddha's third noble truth, letting go. Letting go, as a caterpillar must do, it is in process, and what emerges is this beautiful creature, a butterfly, which is what I want to talk about, letting go. Unfortunately for us as human beings, we face a dilemma. It's like, oh no, poor us. Because as human beings, what we want to do, we've heard, I think many of you have been here, have heard, as the Buddhists have been saying forever, that life is a matter of 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows. And as human beings, what we want is, of course, the joys. We want those in our life. As far as the sorrows, it's like, you know, I really don't want them. I think what we really would like is we would like to have the sorrows and learn how to accept them without the yes, but. Don't we? A lot of us have a yes, but, you know. Yeah, this is nice, but you know what? It could have been like this. Oh yeah, it really was a wonderful time, but you know what? It rained, or whatever. We've got these yes, buts, and I think all of us, when we come to our practice, we'd like to know how to really accept wholeheartedly and live wholeheartedly with the joys that are in our life. As for the sorrows, it's like, who wants them? And so I think when we come to practice, what we want to do is, yes, we want to figure out, to find out how to deal with difficult situations more skillfully. Maybe diminish them. Be able to accept them, at least equanimously. Same with difficult emotions, which are usually part of difficult situations, difficult circumstances. So we want the one, we don't want the other, and what do we do? Well, I think all of us being here is the answer. We get into spiritual practice. We feel like spiritual practice, we're going to find some answers to live more fully with what we like and to be able to manage better with what we really don't want to have in our lives. And I have to say, as thinking about this, I think you can call it spiritual damage control. You know, we want to manage things better according to what pleases us. So that's our dilemma, spiritual damage control. And there's nothing wrong with it. The fact is, the Buddha's teaching, really, as you follow it, it enables you to do just these things. To work with the difficult emotions, the difficult situations, so that you're not thrown by them all the time. And to be able to accept what you love more wholeheartedly. Being aware of all your yes buts and qualifications and feelings that I'm not worthy or whatever else goes on, really to work with all those. So this is really good. At the same time, I'll say that the Buddha had more in mind beyond working with our joys and our sorrows. He had something else in mind. And I think as practitioners, it really behooves us to be aware of and appreciate the scope of the Buddha's teaching and understand fully how they apply to us. To understand how they apply to us. And I found a quote by a professor at Brown University, Willoughby Britton is her name. And she is not only a professor of psychiatry, but she's also a Buddhist practitioner. And she said, and she does a lot of research. And she said that in her research and in just her general communications with various people who are Buddhists in Buddhist practice, that most people, she observed, tend to think that insight means insights into one's own personal patterns of neuroses, that it means facing our demons and getting insights into our patterns. And on one hand, I'll say, of course it does. That is what happens. But that's not all that insight means. The Buddha spoke about insight. And as you know, our name of our organization, Insight Meditation Community of Charlottesville. And then you see it all around, the Insight Meditation Community of Richmond and so forth, every IMCW, Washington. Insight is a critical issue. For those of you who are kind of new, or maybe kind of forgot, what an insight is, and how does it link up with our practice. As we continue, and as many of you already know and have experienced, as we continue more and more with our practice, something happens, and that's an insight. It's like, oh wow, a direct experience of reality in the moment. You see something in a new way, not up here. It's not because anybody told you about it, because you have a direct understanding. That's insight. And that is the natural product, the natural outcome of our practice is insight. And the way this, I could say, works is each little insight, you could say, is a piece of wisdom. A wisdom that is directly understood, known by you. There's a great kind of metaphor or image that I really like. If you can imagine say a piece of black construction paper, and then you poke a little hole. That little hole is insight, and then a little bit of light comes through. It's like, oh wow, aha. And then you start poking other holes, right? More and more insights come through. Eventually that's wisdom, Panya. This is what the Buddha is talking about, all these little insights. And the light begins shining through. This is the light that shines in your life. And it's what the Buddha was talking about. What the Buddha was talking about. Now, I'd like to say that I think that it isn't too too surprising that we don't always pay attention to what the Buddha was talking about on the broader level. When he talked about insight, traditionally what he was talking about was insight into impermanence, suffering, and no self. Now, all of us can say, yeah, I know what suffering is, right? And okay, I know what impermanence is. You know, I'm got gray hair. How can I not know what impermanence is? He wasn't talking personally. Here's the interesting kind of switch that is easy to miss. The Buddha, when he spoke about impermanence, suffering, and no self, was talking impersonally, non-personally. He was talking universally, as universal truths that are not centered in our life story. They're not about me. They're not about you. These are simply universal truths, the way existence is. And we are expressions of that. Do you see the shift there? We tend to live life through me. Of course, you live it through each me. Each of us are me's. This is not. These insights the Buddha was ultimately talking about are not personal. It's simply the truth of existence. And this is what he's inviting us to have direct experience with. But as I said, I don't think we really pay much attention to that. We tend to miss that. And I think we tend to miss it because we focus a great deal on our own issues. And when these other come around, namely the impersonal issues, and we have an insight into it, we may not even recognize or honor it. We don't quite get the picture that this is what the Buddha was talking about. This is the wisdom. That's where he's going. Not only the personal wisdom, the universal wisdom of what the Buddha was saying. Now, I think that part of the reason why we don't see it can be really traced back to the Buddha himself. The Buddha spoke, when he taught, about this world and the next world. We've just been reading in our sutta class, our scriptures classes, about some of his scriptures where he's talking about this world and the next world. What's the this world? This world is the world that we all know about, the world of our conventional reality. My truth, your truth, the troubles of this world, that's the this world. And the Buddha gives a lot of teaching about how to deal with this world, how you can be in it with more wisdom, more kindness and love. Then he spoke about the other world. And that's where he begins to talk on the non-personal level. Now, historically, a lot of, I think he did this, we need to understand both what he said and also the cultural context in which he lived. The non-personal level. What many people in those days did was they assumed that, okay, his real message is this non-personal level. It's this world transcending level, transcendence. That's the real message. That's what Theravadins, and this is Theravada Buddhism, said a long time ago. That's the only one that counts. Forget the daily life business. Because they believed that unless you became a nun or a monk, and this is traditional belief, I'm not talking right now, unless you became a nun or a monk, you really weren't into it seriously anyway, and if you were falling in a mess, if your life as a layperson was a mess, went away, you could say, too bad. I don't think anybody really said too bad, but what they were saying is, okay, you'll live this life, and then they all believed in rebirth, and so you try to do your best, according to the Buddha's teaching, this life, you'll have another rebirth, and maybe in some next world, 1,000 lifetimes from now, you will come to the place where the Buddha is talking about the transcendent truths. Does this make sense? I just see a lot of people not. I want to make sure you get it because this is the history of this is what we have inherited. We tend to focus then. I think we in our day and age, however, tend to say, "Oh, forget it. We're not so interested in the next world. We got enough troubles in this world. Let us deal with our own issues in this world." So we made this split between this world and the next world. And we don't necessarily all, and maybe not even most of us, believe in rebirth, but still, we're happy enough to focus on this world and not these world transcendent, whatever it is, of the next world. Now, I would like to say that historically there was an evolution on the this world, next world dichotomy. I think the Buddha could have used better terms, pardon me for being so arrogant to say that. But, he was a pioneer. I mean, he lived in his own time, and he was the first one to be talking about this kind of thing. Now, we've had 2,500 years to come up with some new phrases, but before that, a few hundred years after the Buddha died, there was an evolution in the development of Buddhism, a new school of Buddhism, Mahayana, the great tradition, came up, and of which Zen, for example, is a part. I'm not trying to talk about history here, but the evolution in their insight. Because what these people began to realize is, wait a minute, you don't have to divide into this world and next world. It's all right here, right now. This world and the next world are the same thing. The truths of this world and the transcendent truths are immanent. They're all here, right now, in this moment, which means, hey, you don't have to live 1,000 lifetimes before you're going to get there. It's right now, and it's available to you right now. So this distinction, as I said, we've come up with other terms, and I think that maybe are clearer for us to understand. Things like the relative or the conventional reality and the absolute reality are not two things. They sound like they're two, but they're not two. They're both here right now. I've often used the image of a cross without any religious significance. And some of you have heard it many times, so, well, please just accept. A linear level, this world, it's the present. It's the conventional reality we all know. The life according to me, my story, the life according to you, your story, all of them together. The relative reality. Then there is the vertical level or domain, and we can call that the absolute. And that is the timeless realm, no past, present, or future. It simply is timeless. And we are the inheritors, are able to experience both. And I think this is really, my reading, understanding, is that this is really what the Buddha was pointing to. He didn't say it quite like this. As I said, he was a pioneer. He was doing this first time around. But everything you read when you begin to see this says, yeah, this is really what he meant. He starts talking about to his monks and his nuns, and this is really what he's talking about. He's not asking them to live 2,000 lifetimes from now. It's right now, right now. So it's not a future lifetime. And this was the evolution. And we can understand this right now. So absolute relative are the divided, which is our understanding when we live on our personal level, that things we see in terms of me and you, self and other, good and bad, high and low, divided, and non-divided on the non-personal level. In Zen, they use the phrase, not two, not one. And what does that mean? These two different worlds are different, but they're not different. They're two different worlds, and they're not one world, and yet you can't quite really talk about them. We do talk about them, but you need to grasp them, is the point. You need to live them and experience them. And that is the really difficult point in trying to get it across. I think this cross image, though, is pretty good. We are heir to both, and they're simply not logical. Not logical. So then we come back to where I started, and that was, we talked about the third noble truth, the truth of letting go, not holding on. As we practice in our daily life, we let go, if we're practicing, of many things. We hope to. That's what we're trying to. Of our maybe preconceptions, of our unwholesome thoughts, of unwholesome habits. This is what we're training to do. Ultimately, though, the Buddha was talking about What needs to be let go of is the concept of a self. This is one of his three characteristics of existence. Existence is impermanent. Existence, there's suffering in existence, and there is no self in existence. We live very much with the sense of self. What do you do about that? Well, how do you convince yourself that there's no self? You can't. That's just it. You can't convince yourself that there is no self. You see how ridiculous that is, that idea even? You can't convince yourself that there is no self. And yet the Buddha maintains it's true. And it can, in fact, be experienced. So letting go of this sense of self, the third noble truth, that truth is more than it seems, is what I'm suggesting. The sense of self, the Buddha points out, is a source, big source of suffering. Because as soon as you've got a me, you've got a you. And as soon as you have a me, you've got its wants, and we've talked about this many times, so many of you heard this many times before. As soon as you've got a me, you've got a you, you've got wants, you've got needs, and that sets up the whole world of suffering, as we said so many times. The problem, or the issue is, the Buddha says, it's not ultimately true. Yeah, it's true on this everyday level, but ultimately it isn't true. Ultimately, we've used the word illusion. That doesn't mean we're walking around as ghosts. Not what the Buddha meant. He meant there is another realm of understanding, another reality, another domain. So the spiritual journey that we are on is this journey of letting go. And ultimately, it's a letting go of the sense of self. And so I wanted to read a passage from this really wonderful book by Rodney Smith called Awakening. And here he says, "The journey invites us to give up what we are not, but never asks us to become anything other than what we are. We might question the point of a journey that returns us to where we were before we began. What does the universe want from us that it does not already have? We are not being groomed to have a prominent place in the world, but to be absolutely ordinary, without any pretension or hyperbole. We're not necessarily going to be leaders or teachers, even within our own spiritual groups. There's no egoic payoff of pride and power, and no membership in an elite enlightened club that deliberates upon the conflicts of mankind. Sorry, he says humankind. The sky does not part, proclaiming our saintly ways, nor does it give any testimonial acknowledgement of our freedom. Where does this journey go? It returns us to where we live. We thought our way out of our lives, and now we return to them. We arrive within a spontaneous and thoroughly unique presentation of being. We were never isolated nouns to begin with, and now we frolic in the verb of being. Perhaps this is what life wanted from us all along. It wanted us to come out from under the covers of deception so that full of liveness could enter our veins and offer itself back to where it came." So, from this comment, let's go back to the chrysalis. And we talked about from the vantage point of the caterpillar, and I think from ourselves, this idea of this ultimate letting go is terrifying. Letting go of ourselves, even when we don't like ourselves, we don't really want to let go of it. It is really terrifying. But all great spiritual beings have attested to the fact that this ultimate letting go is not a matter of, it's not a matter of losing your life in the way we fear we are going to. It's not a matter of losing the capacity to love. It's it is loving from another place. Nor is it something that is going to solve all your problems. Like you get scot-free. Once you're enlightened, that's it. Forget all your problems. No, they're still there. But they're held in another way. They're held in another way. The caterpillar has its chrysalis. And I would suggest that for us, our practice, our spiritual practice, is our chrysalis. I can just assure you, as I think many of us already know, that you're not going to emerge from it in the same way that you went in. Change is going to happen. And moreover, like the caterpillar, ultimately, you're not in charge of what that change is going to be. Maybe you're going to come out a butterfly, the human equivalent of a butterfly. You don't know where you're going to come out. We've got to give up control. We don't have control here. It just isn't possible. We are in process when we're in practice. And all we can do is trust. Really trust this process. And knowing that we will be coming more like a butterfly. If that doesn't, maybe some guys are going to be really appalled by being a butterfly, being beautiful or graceful, but freer, lighter, more who we truly are. And that's what the practice is about. So bearing in mind, it's your chrysalis. And that's why, as I said, this third noble truth is really more than it seems. It's not just about letting go of our unnecessary material possessions, not even just letting go of our unwholesome habits. It's so much more than that. And it's something that you can't do, but it's important that we know it's there as we practice it. This is where it's all going. Not to ignore that, not to ignore it, and to trust that your practice is taking you there. I wanted to read a verse as I close from the Tao Te Ching, the way of life, the Taoist text, the core of the scripture in the Taoist text. This is a translation by a man named Whittier Bynner. He said, people, through finding something beautiful, think something else unbeautiful. Through finding one man fit, judge another unfit. Life and death, though stemming from each other, seem to conflict as stages of change. Difficult and easy as phases of achievement, long and short as measures of contrast, high and low as degrees of relation. But since the varying tones give music to a voice, and what is the was of what shall be, I'll read that again. But since the varying tones give music to a voice, and what is the was of what shall be, the sanest man sets up no deed, lays down no law, takes everything that happens as it comes, something to animate, not to appropriate, something to earn, not to own, to accept naturally without self-importance. If you never assume importance, you never lose it. So for those of you who might be a little interested in what might it be, I just said, we cannot make this inside of no self happen. It happens in its own time in each of our lives, and I know some of you have experienced it. But there are practices, and I'd like to share with you a Zen practice that they've been doing in the Zen tradition for centuries, and it's very simple. It's the practice of asking, what is it? And that is, you ask that this is a question, the what is actually about yourself. But don't say who, because the answer is, first of all, not on a rational level, not on the logical level, and it isn't ultimately a who. So asking what is it over and over, like hundreds of thousands of times. In Zen, when you're in Zen practice, this becomes like your mantra, except it's not by rote. It's an inquiry into your deepest heart. What is it? And each time when you think you've got an answer, it's probably an answer from the mind or emotions. Oh, you can say, oh, well, it's my intellect. Oh, it's love. Oh, it is. And then we have an answer. And there are umpteen stories about the Zen masters who say, nope. And I'll say, I've studied in Zen before I came to this tradition. And I did some study with, and they all do it differently. with these traditions, but with Sasaki Roshi, who I believe just died. Didn't he just die recently? At any rate, at 100 and something or another. Anyway, what you would do is you would go into a meeting with him, and they were like 2-minute long meetings, and you already would have this little riddle or koan, as they call it, and this is during a retreat, and you would explain what your experience or your understanding of this question. What is it? He would ring a bell, out you go. You ain't got it. That's not it. Go back and try some more, and over and over and over. And of course, during a retreat, that's one thing, and you do it while you meditate, or you do it while you're standing up, while you're eating, you do it while you happen to be looking at flowers. What is it? And eventually it drives you crazy. And when it drives you crazy, then you are at the place where this is promising, because you get out of your mind, you get out of your thoughts, and then it can happen. All kinds of stories in Zen tradition, like the monk who's been training for years and years and years, and he's sweeping the courtyard, and all of a sudden a stone hits something, goes ping, and it happened. The insight. He goes to his master, all excited, and tells him the insight. He's got it. So this is an invitation. If you are interested, it's both a simple and a profound inquiry. But it's not just a once-a-day inquiry. You let it grow. In Zen, they talk about allowing great doubt, or we might call it great energy, to build up around this question, so that it eventually becomes something that you've got to know the answer. When you've got to know the answer, that's when the answer can come. So, thank you for listening. And we have a few minutes, and if anybody has any comments or questions, let's talk about them.
What is it?
That's the answer. And maybe you know that. Anybody else? Are we all consumed with what is it now? Thank you, everybody. So we'll see you next week.